My first 5 to maybe 8 years at the Big Four were just that, sort of burning the midnight oil, up to 100-hour weeks.
Wow.
Go. I'm going to go quite deep on this one then.
Great.
I was fortunate to have stage 3 cancer when I was 23 years old, working at the Big Four. And I say fortunate because, not to get too philosophical, but my view is that you can work a million jobs in your lifetime, to the day you die, but you'll never get a second chance at your job. My boss once asked me, why are you so analytical? Why don't you trust your gut a bit more? And I've thought long and hard about this. And my dad was in the construction game. To innovate, to genuinely create something new, you are at a high risk of failure. And therefore, if you aren't failing, you effectively aren't successfully. All it is a simple shift in mindset. Instead of saying, why is this happening to me? It's saying, hang on, there's a good reason this is happening to me. Like, what is it that I can learn from this, and what can I do with it?
Welcome, Dritton, to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
It's a pleasure. So you're actually my first guest. I've just recently changed the name of my podcast from Startup Journeys Founders Unplugged, which I wasn't really 100% happy with. Just for a start, it was a mouthful. And I originally wanted to have a podcast that talks about failures and how we learn from that and we move on. Because there are a lot of failures. There's heaps of success stories out there. And the reality is there's more failures than successes. But focusing on what we can learn from failures, because that's just part of life, it's part of startup life, part of everything, and making a failure not, sound like a dirty word, so to speak, with that sort of connotation. No, failures are good because we learn from them. So the new podcast name is Startup Fail Wisdom Podcast. So Fail Wisdom is put together because we can learn a lot of wisdom from our failures. So what do you think of that name?
I think it's a great change. I was reading Elon Musk's biography over the Christmas break, and it's by Walter Isaacson, who's also done Steve Jobs and a number of others. And he's a big focus of the book. And if you read a lot of the stuff that Steve Jobs and Elon Musk sort of stand for, is about to innovate, to genuinely create something new. You are at a high risk of failure. And therefore, if you aren't failing, you effectively aren't successfully innovating. So I think it's a great move. I think there seems to be a move in the literature and all the podcasts I'm listening to where a lot more people are starting to talk about failure or rejection or difficulties that they have to overcome in order to build a successful business. Because I think the reality is success is the tip of the iceberg, and there's often a lot of rejection, failure, and learnings that underpin that success over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can learn so much. And I was part of a group before that was learning all about business stuff. I think it's almost like 10 years ago. And they used to have one successful person after the other come on stage and talk about, how they were successful. But each one of them had a different story and was successful in different ways. So one would say, this is how you can be successful. The other would say this, and that would be the opposite to what one was saying, contradict them. But I think we can learn more actually from the failures that they've had along the way, because then you talk about a particular failure and someone will like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. That's what's going on with me now. Maybe I could try this. So, and I think those stories are actually more interesting, to be honest. It's like the hero's journey in literature or in film. It's all about that journey and the obstacles along the way and, how they overcame them. I think that's much more interesting in storytelling as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's a function of culture and society, right? Like we celebrate successes, and there's sort of almost embarrassment, I think, around failure. And it really is about shifting the mindset and embracing failure and learning from failure and learning from leaning into it and learning from. I've got a little 2-year-old daughter, Whenever I'm starting it now in our conversation, sort of like, making mistakes is absolutely normal, but what are we learning from them? That's what I'm trying to drill into her from a young
Yeah,
age.
yeah. There's some sort of saying like, if you've never made a mistake, then you've never done anything.
Anything new, by definition.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty
exactly.
much. All right. Well, yeah. Anyway, so you are my first guest with a new name, and it's great to have you on. So I guess to kick things off, I'd love to hear a bit about your background and what led you to run your own startup.
Yeah, for sure. It might make sense to just give a little bit of a background as to what I do.
Yes.
Effectively a international tax lawyer. So
Hmm.
I help multinational businesses who are either coming into Australia or expanding out of Australia set up their tax structures to ensure that it's compliant with the relevant tax laws. So I'm a tax consultant, if you
Hmm.
like, so in the services type business. Professionally, my background is I'm a lawyer, and I've also got a background in finance. My business background started, or professional career started quite young. So it was a family construction business that I grew up in, and I was on the tools from a very young age. I think most kids were spending their weekends in holiday parks. I was carrying tools around and helping dad, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was my way of spending time with dad over the holidays. I ended up running that business through most of university. So my dad would go over to Europe for 6 months and hand the business over to me to run, which was my first, I guess, introduction into entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Then, from a sort of law perspective, I finished my degree and then joined one of the big four accounting firms and did my traineeship there and spent about 11 years there, was a director in that practice. And then a rare opportunity, so I was on the advisory side, if you like, and then a rare opportunity arose to go on the other side of the fence, which was the company side. So Rio Tinto moved their tax function from Melbourne to Brisbane. There aren't a whole lot of what we call in-house corporate roles with what I do in Australia, let alone in Brisbane, small little Brisbane. So I jumped at that. Did about 2 years there, and then set up the business. We're in our fourth year now. So that was over 3 years ago. And then following on from that in-house corporate role, established the business.
Yeah, it's interesting that one of the big four companies you work for. I know a lot of other startup founders that have worked for that company along the way as well. It's interesting. It seems to be like
Yeah.
like a training ground almost, or maybe people they work there for a while and then they like just want to do something themselves, or I don't know if it's the culture or that sort of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what drove you away from that?
Um, Lifestyle and family decisions is what drove me away from it. Because I think once you get to the pointy end there and you end up being a business owner in a place like that, there are certain trade-offs that you have to make in order to be, successful as the big four businesses define it. Some do it really well. I don't think I had the makeup to get that trade-off right between family and work in an environment like that. So that really inspired me to make the move.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting, really, because startup life can be really grueling, and people usually work, particularly at the beginning, really long hours. And it's a subject I talk about a lot. Is you got to maintain that sort of balance as much as you can at the beginning. I mean, my guest last week, Wishman Ithakar, who was the Commonwealth Young Person of the Year 2018, and he was saying when he started his startup, he was working, like crazy for 2 years nonstop, and then just got totally burnt out. And that story is so familiar. But it is hard. I mean, it's really hard. You've got really very little resources a lot of the time. You need to be doing just about everything yourself. I mean, how did you deal with that, and how do you compare that to the corporate space? And because it sounds like you're better off doing what you do now, but was it really difficult at the beginning, or?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I went through that phase of my career early on at the Big Four. So my first 5 to maybe 8 years at the Big Four were just that sort of burning the midnight oil, up to 100-hour weeks.
Wow.
Go, go, go. So I definitely experienced that. When I set up the startup, when I set up the business, it was established with some very clear principles and rules in mind. And one of them was really defining what my why was and making sure that I stuck to it. And the why for me is family. The reason I do it is family. It's to have a balance. My wife works some pretty demanding hours. We've got a young family. And not to get too philosophical, but my view is that you can work a million jobs in your lifetime, to the day you die, but you'll never get a second chance at your children. So for me, that's a really, really clear why.
Yeah.
So I've set up, I think to answer your question, I've set up the business in a fashion that tries to mitigate the risk of me working those kind of hours again.
Okay.
But it's very easy to dip back into that life if you're not careful. So I've got some, my wife and I constantly use her as my sounding board to ensure that I'm getting it right. And to the end of last year, during Christmas, it's a very busy period for us, and I wasn't where I wanted to be. So this year, I am, tweaking a few things to try and get that right again.
Okay, so knowing your why is really important. So some of these strategies that you put in place, if you were talking to like a new startup founder that's coming to you and saying, look, I want to do this startup, I don't want to get burnt out. I know that you put some successful strategies in place to keep that balance. What would you be telling them? What actual specific strategies would you advise them to do?
It's a good question. I think I think there's the winning work piece. So what do you do around winning work and building your business? There's the delivering or building the product, whatever it is that you're doing. So there's the outward market facing piece. I think there's the inward delivery and business building piece. On that, I would say that partnerships are critical. One, so like anyone who goes out thinking they can do everything themselves is really setting themselves up for failure. So I think surrounding yourself with the right people who you can work together with is absolutely critical. I think that the other piece is perfection. If you're striving for perfection, I think you're going to again set yourself up to fail. And what I mean by that is the old 80-20 principle. You get 80% of the way there with 20% of the effort. And often I see a lot of business people, be it either startups or in large corporates or large consulting houses, put so much effort into that final, into that 80%, that remaining 80% for little rewards. I think it's being smart around where you invest your time, and perfection is not always the answer.
Work smart, not hard.
I think so. So partnering and defining your objectives and not trying to like sort of overcomplicate and over perfect it, because you will, I think, set yourself up for failure.
Yeah. I don't think there's any such thing as perfection in the startup world anyway, because you're doing something new. It's never been done before, and you're just learning along the way and creating something. And there's a saying, progress is better than perfection.
Yeah.
And I believe that, because you can never really reach perfection. And then it can also make you really stressed as well, because if you're a perfectionist and nothing's ever really going to be perfect, because you'll get to one stage, you think, oh, but I need to do this, I need to do that, or it's not quite perfect yet. And that's quite stressful as well. So I think that's, really good advice.
Yeah. I learned it the hard way. I was again, back in the big consulting houses when I was there trying to perfect everything, like down to the commas in where the commas are in my bullet points. Are they all consistent? And sure, if you've got the time and capacity to do it, they're fantastic things to aim for and strive for. But I got to the point where I was at a breaking point just because I was putting energy into the things that didn't really matter, to be honest, in the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it was about, and I think the only way, if you are a perfectionist like I was or am, I think the only way to really appreciate that's to go to breaking point, like go to the point where you burnt down and realize that it's not sustainable. So I had to go down that path and reach that point. I hope others can acknowledge that that earlier and adjust their behaviours earlier to avoid that point, because it's not a pretty place to be.
No, I mean, yeah, hopefully if they listen to your story and others about burnout, then less likely to do that, or to at least think about that, what they're doing. Now, as we spoke before, this podcast is all about failures and challenges and obstacles along the way. So can you share some of the key challenges you faced when starting TP Benchmark, your startup, and how you overcame them?
Yeah, and it's probably even worth talking about what led me to establishing TP Benchmark, because in a sense, it was built on the back of what others might perceive as failure, which I saw as an opportunity. So like I was a bit uninspired in my old role. I was actually trying to seek approval to start it on the side as a side gig. I'd had approval from the ethics department, and the next final approval was from my big boss. When I walked into my annual review meeting, sitting next to her was the head of HR, and I went, this isn't a good start. I can see what's going down here. And I got made redundant, and there was a business restructure. And it was very easy. And don't get me wrong, it's always a kick in the guts the day that you're made redundant. I'm not going to put on a brave face and say that it didn't affect me negatively, but very quickly I got into like what opportunity arise here. Like I had this idea to build this business on the side. It was going to be a side gig. Like, is this my sign to start the business? So I think the first failure, if you like, or sign of rejection was the redundancy from my corporate job. But I very quickly tried to turn that into a positive and see what opportunity sat within that. And I think that's really, really important. I think as an overarching sort of idea, I think the key is to lean into rejection and failure and see what the learning opportunities are in it, because there will always be some. And I think some of my biggest learnings were on the back of, at the time, what felt like difficult circumstance or rejection or failure. So that's when you learn the most, I think.
Obviously, as you were saying, you're a perfectionist. You dedicated like 5 to 8 years in that company, and then you were trying to do, something on the side, which is fair enough. You went through all the right processes. And how did you feel about that, in that moment? Like, go into more details, like you're sitting down and then your boss tells you what, and, what was going through your mind in that moment, because that's a big moment in your life that you've turned into a positive. But I'd love to know what you felt then.
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail, but I sort of, in part, was anticipating it and was preparing myself financially for it. It was in the mining industry, and I think going into a mining job, I enjoy my history. And if you look at the mining industry, second that there's a downturn in the economy, which there wasn't at that point, but the second there is a downturn in the economy, there are always massive redundancies.
Okay.
So going into that job, one of the first things I did was sort of seek out what insurance was, redundancy insurance effectively was, right? So I guess to answer your question, it's all about hoping for the best and planning for the worst with me in terms of the mindset. So I was sort of always had an eye on that possibility. So when it arose, and what was my feeling at the time, it was like, well, I prepared for this. Like I had prepared for this day. Like, yes, it's a kick in the guts. Mm-hmm. My wife was pregnant with our first child at that point. So you're sitting here going, oh, geez, there's, you got your mortgage, there's financial stress there. But so that was, I think, my first instinct, like, was just caring for the family financially. which my wife works as well. So how are we together going to achieve that?
Yeah.
But then very quickly just went, okay, well, it is what it is. Like there's no point, like I'm a stoic from way back, there is 0 point dwelling on what you can't control. So I very quickly went into sort of what are my opportunities and did a spreadsheet up to see what possible jobs were out there, either in corporate roles or running my own thing.
Yeah.
And with my why, my underlying why, sort of assess each of those options, and tried to work out what was best for me. And at that time, to my mind, it was establishing the business.
Yeah, it's good advice. So you have a very analytical mind, and you prepare, and I guess that helps a lot when those situations happen. You're ready for it, pretty much. It
does, but like your biggest strengths can also be your biggest weaknesses. So with a tendency to be over analytical, it's very easy to overanalyze a situation. What do they call it? Paralysis by analysis. I'd like to think that I don't go there. I definitely did in my younger career, earlier in my career. But yes, I am quite an analytical thinker, and try to take things back to first principles always, which frustrates a lot of people because I'm not one to go with the status quo. In corporate roles, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Like people would say, I'd say, why are we doing it this way? And they'd say, well, this is how it's always been done. And that's just the worst answer for me, for so many reasons.
But absolutely. Yeah. And that's probably why you're a startup founder, because, but it's interesting as well, because usually as a startup founder, quite often you're making lots of decisions, and some on the fly and that. And I've had other discussions with other founders and advisors on this. And what I believe is that first thought that comes to your mind is usually the right one. Like using your intuition, people call it gut instinct, whatever you want to call it, is usually the right one. But then again, you may have that thought and then you analyze it, but sometimes you analyze too much and then you'll do something differently that may not work out. I mean, being a very analytical person, how do you operate now in the startup? Because sometimes you do, I guess, have to make quick decisions, and sometimes they can make a huge difference to your business.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it goes to the heart of risk taking and risk mitigation. So, like, I'm trained in finance, right? And if you don't take risks, you won't get rewarded. Is sort of the underlying economic and financial theory. And in my space, a lot of accountants and lawyers are very risk averse, and they want to be able to see the path and rule out all possible risk factors before proceeding. And if you take that approach, again, you're per the theory, you're unlikely to be rewarded for it. So I'm very cognizant of sort of you need to take risk, and my view on that is I think the best client relationships are ones where you have skin in the game. I think you take a risk. So how does it play out for me? Like you might be scoping something and there are a few unknowns, and you can never really, you got two options. You can either spend time to try and rule out those unknowns, which is just going to pest your client, or you can just provide some brief assumptions around what it is that you've assumed going into it, get moving on the job and come back to it if you need to. So I think moving quickly in my game is far more important, I think, than, again, perfecting the outcome, which has been a big learning, I think, for me over the years. Like, it comes back, I'm bouncing around a bit, but it comes back to, I think, obsessing over your client is number one, I think, attribute across any sort of startup, be it a product startup, be it a consulting startup.
Yeah.
And I think that giving them a great experience is critical.
Absolutely.
So in my mind, I think to answer your question, it's balancing risk, reward with ease of use and friendliness for your customer. And that's the balance. And there are just times where you've got to throw caution to the wind, and work out I like to work out what is my worst case. again, being analytical, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What's the probability of that playing out? And then working out, well, how bad is the worst case scenario? And more often than not, if you can quantify it, it might be some financial loss, but you're happy with the quantity of that financial loss, but you can see a potential reward elsewhere. You just got to take that risk.
Yeah, and you can apply that to a lot of different situations. Like, for example, a lot of people hate pitching or getting up in front of people. They feel really nervous. And if you say, look, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, people say no, or they don't like it. And what does that mean? There's like nothing really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you can apply it to that. And I did have another guest, Peter Brown, and he's an ex-actor and he works helping pitches. And he was talking about the when we do the lean canvas, then when we go through that, we're just making assumptions about everything. But he says, don't forget those assumptions are from all the knowledge that you have, all the learnings that you have. So they're assumptions, but it's from a lot of learning, experience, etc., that go into that, even though they're just assumptions at that moment. And quite often, they're correct as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I had an experience recently where I had to invest a certain amount of money into a certain partnership, and it could have fallen flat on its face, or it could have been useful. And I'll never know. There's no way of analytically proving it one way or the other. And I quantified the amount. I said, well, am I happy with losing this amount of money over the next 12 months in light of a potential gain of this? And I said, yeah, I am. And it ended up being a successful investment. But it was what's the amount at risk? It's taking emotion out of it and approaching it with a very rational, probability weighted approach is I think the skill.
Or the other way that a lot of people do, more like me, I'll just get a vibe about it, about the person, about the investment. And it's like when you're talking to somebody and they might be blah, 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 very flowery, nice words, but you feel like there's something wrong here. You don't get that vibe from them. You know what I mean? It's like when people aren't genuine, I guess. That's when those sort of things start going off in the head. It's like, okay, got to be careful of this one.
And that's a really good point. Coming back to your point around gut feel, I think there's definitely something in that. And your gut's, I think, more right than it's wrong.
Yeah,
I think usually.
Yeah. And I think a lot of successful founders, they really go on that primarily. Then then later they can do all the analytics or whatever. But sometimes you've got to make a decision in the moment. But interesting conversation around that. I probably am a really massive risk taker in just about everything I do, which is not good either. It's got to be a balance, So it can work out sometimes. Like if you buy Bitcoin early, people are like, "Oh, that's all crap."
Yeah.
For example, that might work out for you. Or, I was doing property investment years ago, and I just bought one property and then straight away used the equity, bought another one, and ended up with 6 properties in 2 years, and then lost the whole lot.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I think it comes if you'd ask a psychologist or a psychiatrist, a specialist in this space, I'm sure they'd say that your risk appetite is a function of your upbringing and your childhood. I've just been thinking about what is it that I had a boss once asked me, why are you so analytical? Why don't you trust your gut a bit more? And I've thought long and hard about this. And my dad was in the construction game, real risk seeker, and wasn't overly analytical, but he had some rules of thumbs. I remember once he was quoting up like a 100-story building. And he came up with an answer in 10 minutes. He sort of did one quick calculation in 10 minutes. It was a multi-million-dollar job.
Yeah.
And I said, "Are you mad? Like you're going to quote on a multi-million-dollar job on literally a 5-minute calculation?" So I spent the whole night going over the plans, and I got to exactly the same number as him. But I think he was real risk-seeking. It paid off for most of his career, but there were a couple of times it really burnt him. And I think that it's those instances where he got burnt that have stayed with me and are maybe having me go in the other direction at times to try and make up for I think it was Barack Obama. Barack Obama in his autobiography said that all successful men, now the words he used, unfortunately, but all successful men are either trying to make up for their father's mistakes or live up to his expectations. And in this instance, I think I'm trying to make up to his mistakes.
That's interesting. But overall, he was successful in his strategy.
Overall, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like that 80-20 rule again. I guess. I don't know if you can apply it to that, but...
Yeah, no, it is. But I think other challenges, to come back to the original question around, in my game, it's how am I going to win work? How am I going to deliver that work?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think volatility and uncertainty in the business, and I think that's a big one, which I'll come to, but sort of winning work, I think it's really important. In my challenge was, in my space, the big four accounting firms really lead the space. There's not a lot of advisors sitting outside that space that do what we do, which is a benefit and also creates challenges. There's a perceived reputational benefit of going to one of these large companies. So coming in as a small player is so far up the other end of the spectrum that it can be daunting. So I think what we did was we really tried to define what differentiated us. And I think for a long time there, I was trying to say, well, we are just like the big four. We are just like, for a number of reasons. All our staff were ex-big four. So, in substance, you're getting the work done by the same people. But then there was this moment, I don't know if it was because a mate recommended that book by Max Gladwell, David and Goliath, where I started to lean into our differences. So the big four are large, they're slow, they're very expensive. They don't use senior staff. It's a very big leverage model. So they're using junior staff to deliver a lot of the work and senior staff to review it, which means that the quality of work is not always there. It's a big generalization. You can have great experiences, but not always. And I thought, well, we're quick, we're nimble, we're all very senior, and we have a fraction of the cost structure. So started leaning into those differences and really owning those differences as opposed to sort of shying away from them, I think was a pivotal point for us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And a mutual friend of ours, Liz Swigart, on the podcast was talking about that as well. It's like, just be genuine. Like when I started, I felt like, we have to look like this is my VR training startup. Or we have to look like big companies, or other big organizations. They won't be interested in what we're doing. So you're trying to be perceived as something bigger than you are. And it just doesn't feel right or genuine in a way. But I think what Liz was saying, not the same words, but just be yourself, be genuine, tell people your story, and then, bring them on the journey with you and build that community, I think is the best way to do that.
I agree with that. And I think defining your buy is really, really important. There's a part of the market, for example, that for us is unfazed by this reputation, this brand piece that the big four can provide. And there's a part of the market that is fazed by it. So like just being really clear around who your buyer is and just investing your time in the right spaces. And I think a learning for me was that's often by trial and error. There have been instances where I'm like, oh yeah, I worked with this person for a decade. Like they would absolutely, they know exactly what they're getting by engaging us. It'll be a no-brainer. But again, had reluctance because of this brand perception. And equally on the other side, I'll pitch for work where really large jobs, I spent 15 minutes on it because I'm like, there's no way I'm winning this work. Ended up winning it. So I think you got to be flexible in your strategy, but it's a discovery piece in a startup, I think, to work out who's going to buy your product. And I think having an important learning piece for me was not being fixated on your initial strategy. Like you may be surprised by who your buyers might become. So being flexible.
Yeah, and you've got to be flexible in every way in a startup. I mean, you might pivot into something that you didn't even think of initially.
Completely.
And that happens quite a lot as well.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
If there was only one piece of advice you could give an early startup founder, and only one, some people say, only one, what would that be?
I think it centers around the start of our conversation, which is the mindset around rejection and failure. I think resilience, personal resilience is one of the key traits that you'll find underpins a lot of entrepreneurs and startup failures.
Yep.
And entrepreneurs and startups. And what I mean by that is you are going to get rejected. You are going to have failure. There will be moments where you're questioning whether the business works. There'll be moments where you're on top of the moon, really thinking that it's going to shoot the lights out. It's a roller coaster of emotions.
Absolutely.
And I think the only way to get through that is to maintain a level of resilience and lean into rejection and failure and try and embrace it. Because if you let it knock you down, your chances of getting back up, I think, are reduced. And I'm sure that all, if not most, startup founders that you speak to could give you, hundreds of stories around instances where they were about to throw it in, or it was really, really difficult, or they thought it wasn't going to work, but it ultimately did. And I think the only way you get to the other side is through being resilient.
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it? Because I've had this conversation before as well. There's this image where there's a gold digger and he's digging away, a really long tunnel, and then you see this massive gold deposit, and it's just like an inch away, and then he gives up. I always had that image in my head, but then again, sometimes there's the saying, if you're going to fail fast as well, because you might put in a lot of resources and money into something that isn't quite working. So I guess it's a fine line, really. Resilience is absolutely needed, but I think if something absolutely isn't working and customers aren't interested, just depends on, there's so many factors that go into it. In mine, it was just like lack of marketing and sales, because there was other companies that came way later than us that did really, really well. And the only difference was the marketing and sales. But if it's something that customers want and need, then it's more likely. But if it isn't, and you haven't done your proper customer research at the beginning, there can be a point where you think, oh, what do? I can't continue, and I'm going to lose all of this.
Yeah.
But then you might lose a whole lot more, or you know what, I'm really close to this happening, and I'm going to push on. It's in hindsight, you can say, well, yeah, I should have done this, should have done that. When you're in the moment, that's one of the most difficult decisions, I think.
As you can tell, I like to read. Your gold mining analogy really resonated. I'm a big fan of Lex Friedman, the podcast host, the MIT AI expert, and he always talks about Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book. And I don't know if you've heard of that, but Viktor was a psychiatrist, a Jewish psychiatrist who was in the Nazi detention camp, and really used the experience to try and understand human behavior, at its extreme circumstances. And I think the essence of the book is finding meaning in really difficult circumstances. And he talks about instances where, there were 3 or 4 occasions where he missed a truck. Him and a friend missed a truck that was on Liberation Day, the truck out of the Nazi detention camp, and he was bummed by it. and very quickly learnt soon after that the truck had actually gone off to another camp, and no one survived on that particular truck. So there were all these near misses, which he dodged just inadvertently by complete accident. And he talks about the fact that if when you have rejection or failure, you can look at it through the lens of, well, what's this all worth? Like, what am I doing this for? Or you can flip the perspective and say there has to be meaning. There has to be meaning in what it is that I'm experiencing right now, and it has to be positive. What is it? What can I learn from it? And I think that's really, really critical, is to find that meaning. And it's a shift in mindset. All it is a simple shift in mindset. Instead of saying, why is this happening to me? It's saying, hang on, there's a good reason this is happening to me. Like, what is it that I can learn from this, and what can I do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. What is it I can learn from this? I mean, you had your experience in your previous job, and then you were laid off. I had an experience where I had a job for a lot of years. To be honest, I was bored out of my mind. But I was pretty much bullied out of that place. So it wasn't a pleasant experience. But from that, I did my startup. I'm doing this podcast. Life has been a lot better since then, and I can do my own thing, feel like myself, and so it's just the meaning you give everything. And some people say as well, there's a saying, there's no such thing as coincidence as well, which is I guess a whole nother topic, but I do believe that in a lot of instances. There's meaning really in everything, and it's the meaning you draw out of everything as well. Like, for example, every morning I do a grateful practice. I'll wake up, try to feel really peaceful, get in touch with, whatever, and then think about all the things I'm grateful for, which is so many. Like, there's always stuff. And then that sets up my whole day to feel so much better. And if I didn't do that, maybe I think, I haven't got time. It's going to take me 5 minutes. I bet, my day, I would waste like hours more in the day, because I wouldn't be feeling at the same level, wouldn't make the same decisions, wouldn't, it's really important.
Yeah.
It's funny you brought up the AI, this podcast around AI, which is really interesting. It's like a huge topic at the moment. I did notice a post you had recently on LinkedIn talking about AI and your industry. And I was just wondering, because some people say that AI will kill whole industries like accounting and like law and, a whole lot of other things, like in the next 10 years. But I saw that you were actually positive about it in some areas. So, tell us more about that and what you think is the impact of AI is going to be in your industry and in general.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Again, I enjoy my history, and I think history is underpinned by technological change. It began with the invention of fire, and it's more recently extended to the development of computing, and now computing power is obviously just increasing exponentially, and will do again, I think, once sort of quantum theory advances as well. My view is that you need to lean into technological change and not shy away from it. And there's two schools of thought in my industry. One is it can never replace us, find every single reason why we are superior to it and why it will never replicate certain human behavioral traits. The other school of thought is, well, geez, this can make our life a lot easier and allow us and manage a lot of the routine tasks that take away too much of our time, and let us focus on value-adding areas, initiatives. So they're the two schools of thought. I share the former, the latter school of thought, which is, if you look at the course of history, all technology has always done is a way to add value in other areas and create new jobs. That's the theory. Like steel workers lost their jobs, soon after, well, I think it was the 50s and 60s around the world, where a lot of the steel mills, say in the UK and the US, shut down. not sure of the precise period, but that created a whole lot of retraining. So I think you have to lean into technological change. I've always been a huge advocate of using technology to do our job and deliver our work much more efficiently. I had big disagreements with some very senior leaders when I was talking about automation 7-8 years ago. And I was told, well, we're going to cannibalize our business. I said, if we don't cannibalize our business, someone else will. And I think that's the practical reality of it. So I use it a lot, and it's cutting hours and hours out of routine, non-value-adding work, and therefore allowing us to get in front of our clients, spend more time with them on things that add value to their businesses, as opposed to us spending time, locked up at our desks, doing administrative tasks that take us away from our clients. So I think we've just scratched the surface. I was watching an interview with Sam Altman, obviously the CEO of OpenAI, at the World Economic Forum just last week.
Okay.
And they showed a video of him predicting the power of AI and its future 10 odd years ago.
All right.
And then they played it back to him and they said, how close were you to where you think you are now?
Yeah.
And he was pretty close, with one exception. Like he felt at that time, 10 odd years ago, that AI's ability to create, its creative ability would be limited relative to humans.
Yeah.
But what AI is showing us now is that it is as powerful at creating. He used an example of the different artwork that's being created by AI, which is original, innovative, novel. One example that comes to mind, I saw recently that one of the US schools, I want to say Yale, I can't remember which one, commissioned a piece of work with OpenAI to try and develop the next mineral to effectively replace lithiums in battery technology. And I think in the space of a week or 2 weeks, they created a mineral that is far more effective than lithium. And they said it would have taken them 20 plus years, I think, to come up with that substitute pre this technology. So I think we're just touching. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry, but we're just scratching the surface. Yeah. And I think it's going to truly change the way that we do business.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm in your camp as well. Like I use AI and it helps me a lot. I'm just, with my startup, we're up to 12 people, with employees and interns before, and now it's just me. And, I can get a lot of work done and all that sort of tedious stuff, admin and all that sort of thing. It just speeds that up so much. That's amazing. That story about the mineral, that's amazing. And that they're the sort of breakthroughs that are going to happen. I mean, a lot of people still do fear, these sort of Terminator 2 type scenario where it takes over the world. Hopefully not. I guess we need to put a lot of things in place now, and I think some countries are doing that so that bad actors can't use it for bad things. There's enough bad stuff going on in the world anyway. But
and they're genuine concerns. I think they are genuine concerns, and we need to be. I'm a big fan of Yuval Harari, and he's been the author of *Sapiens*, and he's been quite outspoken about this for some time. Not to say that we can't do it successfully, but to say that if we aren't careful, this could end very badly for us.
Yeah.
Some experts are just really dismissive of it, saying, well, AI will always act in our best interest because we've developed it. I'm not sure I agree with that school of thought, because the truth is that it's starting to become a black box. Like, a lot of the developers don't even know sort of what it's capable of and what its intent is. So it does need some regulation. I think that is important.
Yeah, and about 6 months ago, when I had the whole team, and AI was, Chat GPT was coming out and all of that, I used to say to everyone, look, don't be threatened by this. Use it, learn how to use it well, and it'll just increase your productivity,
Yeah.
So, because some people think, there's it's going to take my job, and I guess it can in some cases. But if you learn how to use it properly, if you become really good at AI and prompting and using it, then if you're working for someone else, you increase that productivity for them, and if it's for yourself as well. I think we should never really ignore technology advances. Not that technology is always great, depends what it is, but there's it can be used for good or bad. It's like a knife; you can use it to cut up food, or you can stab someone, I guess. So it's the uses that we get out of it, but it is a very, very powerful tool to use.
Yeah, I think you need to lean into it. Like if you don't lean into it, it will take your job.
Yeah. All right. So to finish off, what is a question you wish people asked you that no one has ever asked you?
Jeez. That's a tough one.
Something about you that you'd like people to know, or that I wish Paul would have asked that on the podcast.
I think whenever I meet someone new, I think everybody has a story, a life event, or a situation that has really defined who they are, and it's often in your formative years. So I always, when meeting someone, one of the last questions I'll ask is, "What do you do?" It'll be to try and find out what it is that has defined the person that I'm speaking to. And if you listen to Steve Bartlett, we've discussed that we're both fans of Diary of a CEO podcast. Yeah. He always starts his podcast there, like, what is it? What is it about your early experiences that define you? So I think it'd be in a similar vein. The question.
Okay. So, Dritton, what is it about your early experiences that define you?
I'm going to go quite deep on this one then.
Great.
I was fortunate to have stage 3 cancer when I was 23 years old, working at the Big Four. And I say fortunate because when you face your mortality at such a young age, again, you can either curl up in a ball and hide under a rug, or you can try and find meaning in that situation. And again, I was the latter, and it really defined my approach to sort of work-life balance. It's a phrase that's used so loosely these days, but for me, it showed me just how fragile life is, how short it can be, and I have very consciously tried to use that experience to prioritize things that I think are really important to me, which are family and personal happiness and family happiness. So I think that would be my answer to that particular question.
Well, thank you for sharing that very personal event. And I'm just really happy that you took the meaning you took from that, because other people, it may go completely the opposite. And I think also with a lot of illnesses, cancer is really obviously a very serious one. Your positive outlook as well can help a lot. I mean, there's even that movie the book about the Laugh Doctor, which is a true story. I think it's called The Laugh Doctor, and I think Robin Williams played him in the movie, the beautiful Robin Williams. But having a positive outlook and trying to be happy will actually promote more health, and you're more likely to recover as well.
And the learning, I haven't watched that movie. I'm a big Robin Williams fan, so I will sit down to watch that tonight. But I think the big learning and message that I would share is just a basic self checkup, right? For women, if it's getting screened, for men, it's similar, making sure there aren't any lumps and bumps where there shouldn't be. And I think that's critical. And I thought I was too busy. I was a graduate in a Big Four, and I thought work was too important. I was too busy to go and see the doctor until one day my dad said, "That's enough. Like, you're in pain. Go and see a doctor." And in my mind, work was just so important that I almost didn't go to see the doctor, and it almost cost me my life. Which in hindsight, you go, well, you're a 23-year-old graduate in an accounting firm. Like, really? Was what could have been that important? And
Oh,
so that's my message, and I try and share that message with everyone, because a trip to the doctor, it's quick, it's cheap, and it can save your life. Like, just err on the side of caution.
absolutely. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be people listening to this that might be in a similar situation. Just go and check it out. I mean, it may not be anything, but at least you'll have peace of mind as well. And never put work over your health. It's, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, what is life about? If you haven't got your health, haven't got your family, and it's you haven't really got anything. You might,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
And it's contextual, right? Like, we're very privileged in Australia. We're in a lucky country where most of us can say that that we can work shouldn't be more important than family, because we can often make the choice to not work and spend time with our family. There are many, if not a majority of the population around the world, who haven't got. You look to the United States, where capitalism's just gone wild, and there's a single mum working 3 jobs to put food on her child's table. She hasn't got a choice to prioritize family over work. So we're very. It's contextual, and I think we're very lucky here. Others might not be so fortunate, but where you have the ability where you have the privilege and the ability to make that choice, for me, it's really clear what choice to make 7 days of the week.
yeah, absolutely. I lived in the States in 1989-90, and I was working for $5 an hour, delivering pizzas, and I remember $4.25 an hour it was our wage, and I don't think it's gone up that much. Yeah, and then you try and get tips from, like, I was making the pizzas, then I was delivering the pizzas, and then I remember the manager of the store was on 50,000 a year, which was a lot in that time, and the manager underneath him was just on $6 an hour, and then all the workers on $4.25 an hour. So it was a huge difference between. But I saw that there in the United States. It just actually made me realize how lucky we are here, really. I mean, obviously the situation could have changed, but I don't think it has. I think that's why they've got so many issues there now.
No, inequality now is at the levels it was in the feudal system.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't get on my soapbox about that, but I'm a bit of a. I believe in this could be relevant to future discussions, like profit sharing and sharing in the wins and successes of your business with those that you're dependent on. I think greed gets you in the end of the day, and I think I learned that from my dad. He'd have jobs which they'd knock over well ahead of budget, and every job the guys would all get a bonus, which was unheard of. He used to help his workers. He basically loaned them money to get their first houses, and just slowly took it off their pay, interest free, just things like that. I think we're nothing without our teams and our staff, and I think being too greedy and selfish will ultimately. It's about giving. I think my motto is life's about survival, success, and then giving. So that's important.
Absolutely agree with that. And I was just remembering, I think it was somewhere in Europe, there was a guy that had a massive factory with like a few thousand employees, and I think he, it was his father's originally, and then it got sold, and he distributed all to all the employees equally. So all of them, I thought that was a beautiful story, and we have to acknowledge, and if people are putting a big effort, we have to reward them as well. Greed is not good.
No.
And that's why I'm not a big fan of the whole unicorn mentality as well. And I've interviewed a lot of founders and funders in the impact space, in the social enterprise space, and they're funding these businesses that it's really hard to get funding, but they're doing really good things for people, for the society, for the environment, and I think that's really important. Is what you're doing as well. It's at the end of the day, some people become really successful, and they might be greedy, but what have they got? They've got nothing really. They can be miserable living in their mansion on the beach, or you could be, really happy because you've really helped people along the way, and you've rewarded people. So I totally
Yeah,
agree with that
I think
philosophy.
we've got a similar mindset. I think by the sounds of things. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, it's been wonderful. Really appreciate you coming onto the podcast and sharing your wisdom and your stories. And I'm sure this will be very helpful for a lot of people. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we finish up?
No, thank you for having me on. I hope that your startup and your podcast goes from strength to strength. I think your genuineness, authenticity, and honesty will see that, I think, come to fruition. So good luck, all the best.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.